All right, welcome back. And we are here today for our Tuesday, May 23rd work session with Xcel Energy. Madam Clerk.
The work session today is a request for a work session to discuss Xcel Energy's Colorado Power Pathway project. The project will require a 1041 areas and activities of state interest permit to be authorized by the board. The project has not been submitted to the Planning and Community Development Department to date.
Please do. Please come forward. We'd love to hear from you. Please introduce yourself. State your name for the record.
I think it's still good morning. Good morning. I'm Heather Bricky. I'm the project director for the Colorado's Power Pathway for Xcel Energy. I'm going to start with just an introduction to the project. I know many of you have seen and been introduced to it, but an overview, talk a little bit about the purpose, and then also give an update on where we're at with the project to date. So as you're aware, this is a $1.7 to $2 billion infrastructure investment in our bulk electric system in Colorado. It is approximately 550 miles divided into 5 segments, and there's also an optional segment 6 or an extension that is in that southeast corner, the May Valley Longhorn extension, that will be decided on at a later date once we know what our electric resource plan is and that there is actually a defined need for that part of the project. So we will be starting construction in the east for segments 2 and 3 this spring. So the long green section and the kind of light purple segment 3 Goose Creek to May Valley section there in the east. We're starting that this month with our access, getting our gates cut, and starting our civil work. We've completed all our permitting in all of those jurisdictions out there, so we're just working through final driveway permits, things like that we need to get. But we are starting construction and plan to be in service in 2026. The next segment to start construction is segment 1 in the north, which will start construction in 2024. And then the plan is to start construction on segments 4 and 5 in 2025. So this is a project that is needed to, its reliability to the bulk electric system in the state. It'll improve the electric grid for the state and also allow for renewable development in the eastern and south part of the state and move the electricity around the state safely. I think I gave a status of where we're at with construction. We're just starting, and we're getting ready to submit our permit applications here in El Paso County as well. Any questions on the overview of the project? Or okay, I'll turn it over to Jen, and she'll talk a little bit about our routing process and how we came up with the preferred routes that we have.
Thanks. I'm sure it's obvious on the map, but just wanted to point out we did kind of annotate where El Paso County is in the bigger project picture here, which is the outline in yellow. The labels are hard to see. And then I don't know if it's showing up on your screens. I know it's not showing up on the wall, but the segments that Heather described, 2 and 3 that we're starting construction on, have kind of a light blue dash to them. And so as part of that, additionally, we have permitted land use permits beyond those couple hundred miles there, and that is shown in black. So we do have permits south in Kiowa County and Crowley County as well, and then up north in Morgan County, Morgan County. All right. So talking about how we got to the lines on the map. We started the project in late 2020. With the pathway project identified in terms of needing to create that loop around the eastern part of Colorado. We knew we had those substation endpoints that were identified on the prior map that defined our segments 1 through 5 in the extension, which you see in the first step on this graphic. We took the area between those substation endpoints and did a lot of mapping, a lot of field visiting, a lot of trying to identify what was between those points. That's what you see represented on the left-hand side in the green and red and orange. Within that color-coded map, we identified a lot of what we called links or route options that we took out to the public through a series of public meetings, virtual and in person, to talk about, gather feedback in that loop at the bottom of the graphic, and ultimately select a single route that we identified as our preferred. For El Paso County specifically, the box in the lower left identifies where we were out speaking with the public here, both at the fairgrounds, the other building here, and then at the Yoder School. Questions on kind of our routing process? I know that's a quick overview.
Thank you. The one question that always comes to mind, so the 2 connections you have for El Paso County, the 2 points, they end up curving essentially to the east. Why was there not an ability to go through the I-25 corridor and utilize what I see are existing already infrastructure?
Yeah. If there aren't any questions on this, I actually have a map on the next slide that I would use to talk to that question a little bit more. So a lot on this map to kind of sort through, but taking all that I identified, on that green and orange and red map, here's an overlay of segment 5. And so this was a map that we shared at public meetings to help folks understand how and why we route the way we do and what ended up being possible for segment 5 in El Paso County, but also counties to the north and south as well. So some of the main considerations are what you see identified in the left here. The first one, to your question, Commissioner, we looked at existing infrastructure corridors, I-25, existing transmission corridors to the west, and we're not able to find a path that allowed 150-foot right-of-way, which is required for the safe operation of the line, in those areas. While some portions of them may have enough space, we very quickly get to dense development, whether that's homes, businesses, other things, and start kind of doing this weaving pattern where we are wrapping communities, wrapping homes, wrapping businesses with that transmission. So those corridors didn't present themselves as a place that we could route the transmission line. So we did look there. On the map here, I-25 corridor, you kind of see in the middle of the left half of the map, what you see identified in kind of that blue are actually points that represent every building that's mapped in those areas, and it starts to form kind of that big blob, if you will, where I-25 goes through Colorado Springs and then other communities to the north. Additionally, I-25 didn't connect our endpoints at the substations in the way that we needed it to. So connecting to the Tundra substation down in Pueblo and Harvest Mile up in the metro area. We also, along the I-25 corridor, have other things that are set aside that we cannot develop in. That includes some military installations, conservation areas, avoiding, again, those homes and businesses, and then maintaining clearances around airports and other types of facilities that restrict vertical development. So as we talk about kind of going, why does it go to the east and bow out the way that it does, so to speak, that is primarily related to the Air Force Academy training areas. Those are shown on the map there in that kind of light orange, peach color that radiate out from the Bullseye Airfield. In coordination with the Air Force Academy, it's identified and asked that we avoid encroaching on those training areas. If we were to cross them, it would be best to do it around the perimeter of them, and altogether better to avoid them in the way that we have with the preferred route as shown on the map. Additionally, in the center there, you can see in various shades of blue and hatching, as well as shades of brown, we have those conservation areas that are set aside for biological cultural conservation. We mapped homes anywhere that we were looking at routing structures and all of those things. So you see the blue dots also continue east, and then identified all of those other areas that we could look to co-locate. So can we be adjacent to a road, other transmission, if it happens to exist in the counties? In some cases, not necessarily in El Paso County, but to the north and to the south, we are co-located adjacent to existing electrical infrastructure, natural gas pipelines and roads where possible. We took all of the lines on the map here out to the public to solicit feedback on the routes that we were presenting and evaluating as alternatives, ultimately selecting the green as shown on the map. And I have a clearer picture of all of those color-coded lines on the next slide, but this is giving a sense of about 30 different criteria that we use to evaluate the transmission line and select the preferred. This is a subset, but the ones that influence the routing the most.
Commissioner Vanderwerf.
Yes, thank you. By the way, I appreciate your taking into consideration Schriever and the Air Force Academy training areas. I think that was good choices. I do have a question, though, on the legend on the left, and maybe it becomes more clear in the next map, but the legend on the left has on the very top, this, kind of dark gray shaded area, and then when I go over to the visualization on the right, it looks like the power line is in the middle of that dark gray shaded area. So is it that's just two colors that kind of look the same, but they aren't the same? Or tell me what that avoiding this land, this dark shaded thing, and how that's interpreted on the map.
Yeah, could you describe the dark shaded area that you're describing? Is that kind of the dark gray that is around our routing?
Yeah, it kind of looks like
Okay.
the backward C.
Yep.
Yeah.
That dark gray really is the focus area. That's where we spent the most time identifying transmission line routes for segment 5. On the legend, and I think this is just a screen kind of resolution color. On the left side, the top kind of what I think you're saying is gray in the avoid conservation, avoid land section.
So what's on the legend and what's on the map as the backward C are actually two different colors. They're just close.
They are, yeah.
Okay.
The legend color should appear on screen as kind of a brown, not
Okay.
gray.
Thanks.
And I'm happy to walk up to the screen over there and point and motion because I tend to talk with my hands. So if that's easier, I'm more than happy to do that.
Would that
as
be
well.
helpful?
There's also a mouse. Thanks.
Would that be helpful? Commissioner Vanderwerf, or are you good? You want to move on to the next map?
Well,
If you can see
yeah,
the
thank
mouse, I
you.
can also point that way, apparently.
I think I can see what you're saying. So if you look at like between Colorado Springs and Denver along the I-25 corridor, I see some similar colors, but they're brownish, kind of close to the backward C corridor. But I guess there is a very slight difference in color between the two. So I think actually I understand what you're saying.
Okay.
Yeah.
You know, in case this was part of your question, you know, as we look at things that are avoidance areas on the left, avoid land set aside for the biological and cultural conservation, resources conservation, you will notice in some cases that existing transmission lines do traverse those. In many cases, those were set aside after the transmission lines were built. And in some cases, they do allow for the construction of transmission lines, but not all. In the case of the eastern part of segment 5, for example, and the northern part, we do have those conservation areas, and some of them explicitly prohibit transmission line construction and development within them. So those were the ones that we had to take, you know, directly into consideration in terms of avoiding those. Others we evaluate to see if there's some flexibility in our ability to do that. And outside of El Paso County, there were conservation areas put in place around a transmission line, for example, as after we built it. Further
Any
questions
further
on this map?
questions?
Looking forward to the next map.
So this is just the cleaner view of all that was evaluated for segment 5 in its entirety. So that dark gray area, that C shape that we saw on the map prior, is represented again here. There's a lighter gray shading that indicates where, you know, we evaluated routes in the entirety for segment 5. We looked much broader than a 20-mile wide study corridor that we initially started with. So that 20-mile wide corridor was expanded, if you will, to look to the west. As you see here, that line that kind of goes by Ellicott and through essentially Calhan or by Calhan here. And then we also looked much further to the east. The most eastern red line on your map there is in Lincoln County and eastern El Paso County. That's Highway 71 would be the nearest landmark there. Evaluation of all of the red lines here are multipliers more than the approximately 140 miles that comprise segment 5 as we talk about moving from the Tundra substation up to the Harvest Mile substation, and is, you know, represents a year plus work, working with the community, soliciting feedback, talking about lines on the map, making adjustments to those based on feedback at public meeting, and then evaluating the criteria that I mentioned. One of the things that we did, and I'll flip back to the prior map, try not to give everyone motion sickness here, is that we mapped all of the feedback that we received at the public meetings relative to the location that it applied to. So on this map, there are kind of these purple dots that you see scattered around. And those represent a comment that was location specific. I'm interested in a route here. My home is here. I just broke ground on that yesterday. My business is here. My ranch is here. I would prefer the route here, I would prefer it not be here. So that is something that we use to help us understand and evaluate the routes as we looked at those to get to the selection of the preferred. So going again to this map, the red lines on the map are what we were calling those links that we've eliminated, and we're not looking at those any further at this point in time. The kind of orange-yellow is what we called an alternative to the preferred. We're also at this point in time not looking at those any further. We're not evaluating those. And the green line on the map is what we're working on processing land use permit applications for in each jurisdiction that segment 5 crosses, and discussing directly with the landowners that would have the easement on their properties. The breakdown in miles is on this slide here by jurisdiction. And I think they're slightly less now. I think we have about 10 in Arapahoe County as we look at the new line on the map. There are no substations proposed between Tundra and Harvest Mile as part of the Pathway project. So all that we would submit in a land use permit application in El Paso County would be for the transmission line. Can talk a little bit about that transmission line on the next slide if there are no questions on the map. So the proposal is for a 345 kilovolt double circuit line. That's depicted on the right-hand side of the slide. The poles will range in height as noted here, generally about 105 to 140 feet depending on conditions. Those conditions include terrain, how far apart we space them, or how close they are. Things that we need to be considerate of: we can make the poles shorter if we put more of them together. The poles will be placed in a 150-foot wide right-of-way, and that's 75 feet on either side of the center line. There's about 950 feet per pole on average, would be the typical span. They'll appear brown. They'll be steel, but they'll weather to a brown color over time. We're required to maintain clearances as dictated by the National Electric Safety Code. That tells us how the lines need to be placed, how far from the ground and how far from things on either side. As we build the line, in certain cases, we'll have access to the right-of-way that we'll need for construction and operations and maintenance, where possible, and it's our general preference to work down the line. We may also have temporary construction areas, as noted here, for equipment and material storage throughout construction. In some cases, we would string the line using a helicopter. If we do that, we have a yard that helicopter lands in and then flies from. We may need concrete batch plants in certain locations. Out east, for the segments that Heather mentioned are currently under construction, we have 2 across the 200 miles. We also take into account stormwater management during construction and as needed during operation. Transmission lines, unlike substations, typically don't require a lot of stormwater management, especially during operation. Questions on the line itself and kind of the components and the look and design specifications?
One other question.
Commissioner Vanderwerf.
Yes, thank you. You may get to it in a following slide, but there are also health effects associated with high-power transmission lines, and maybe that can be easily covered because you've got this 150-foot, 75 either side, and therefore isn't an issue. But I do know there is some scientific research on that. I think you have to be pretty close to the lines, but if you're going to cover it later, we can just wait till then. But I'd just be interested in hearing, something from you all about that again.
Sure. I don't have a slide on that. If we have access to the internet, I can bring up a board from the public meetings, but I can address it quickly now. As part of our filing with the Public Utilities Commission, we have to submit noise and EMF reports to them. Whoa. Oh, is someone going to the internet? Do you mind while I'm talking? Go to Colorado's Power Pathway and go to the library. We'll tag team this here a little bit. And so as part of our filing with the Public Utilities Commission, we have to submit those noise and EMF reports for the project. The PUC has set reasonableness limits as part of those reviews. So pathway as part of our CPCN was determined reasonable in regard to the anticipated noise and EMF. It'll be under library. And this is a little demo on how folks can find all of the information about the project on our webpage here. And then maybe the spring public meeting boards. So as you were suggesting, the right-of-way itself, as we talk about EMF, EMF as it relates to the transmission line will be at its highest point in the center line where the line itself is, and then dissipates quickly over distance to the point at the edge of the right-of-way where it is essentially at background levels, so magnetic fields that just exist in the day-to-day. And then as we look at that particular graph for folks that like graphs here on the left, the yellow line is the limit set by the PUC at the edge of our right-of-way, and then the bell curve there is what we anticipate those fields would be. So well below the PUC limit set for magnetic fields. And then in terms of noise, that's the graph on the right-hand side. Same scenario there in terms of what's set and where we anticipate the line to be. For reference, in case folks like the comparison, the graphic in the middle shows kind of typical things that we're all exposed to every day related to magnetic fields and noise and what those levels are, and then has kind of the arrows for the PUC limits.
Any further questions on that? Thank you.
I'll stop trying to drive. Someone else is driving. Any questions on the line slide before? If not, I just have this end slide, which is kind of our schedule. Heather touched on it briefly to go over. And then any questions that you may have. So as I noted, we started work on the project in late 2020. We filed our CPCN application with the PUC in early 2021, which is the left side of the graph. Quickly moved into the public outreach portion of our project in summer of 21. That's when we conducted virtual public open houses to introduce the project at a time where we were prohibited from large gatherings in person. So that was the way that we introduced the project. Moved through the summer conducting outreach with all of the jurisdictions around Pathway, continuing to solicit feedback through email, hotline discussions with folks. We started our in-person public meetings in the fall of 21 and continued through in segment 5 all the way through August of 2022 with public meetings related to routing and collecting feedback on the project that we used to select that preferred route. We've been in a land use permitting kind of process since summer of 2022, so kind of coincidentally out east, we were working on our land use permitting at the same time we were continuing routing here. As I mentioned, we have land use permits for over 300 miles of the line further to the east in Colorado, with about 200 left to permit. As Heather mentioned, starting construction out east. That is the kind of green bar that's on there for segments 2 and 3. That'll be complete in 2025, and then we move into our staggered construction schedule, where the segment up north, segment 1, would start, and then segments 4 and 5 would be the last to be constructed and in service. The goal of the project in its entirety being completed in 2027. So that's the schedule, and then the last piece here is just for everyone, is Heather so nicely demonstrated pulling up the magnetic fields board. We've maintained a website for the entirety of the project. We post updates there regularly. We have a library that shares all of the information that we've taken to public meetings before. We will be posting our construction page that'll have updates there. We've maintained the information line number and the email. Those are checked multiple times a day for any communications that come in, and we work to respond to those as quickly as we can with getting information from our various team members. It's a large team for a project like this, so if it's a specific engineering question, we'll reach out to those folks, for example, to generate a response. So these will remain active through the duration of the project and are a good source of information for folks, in addition to reaching out to any of us directly. That was the slides, so are there more questions?
Can you clarify for me whether you have put in an application in El Paso County yet or not?
We have not, no.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Geithner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, so I'm a little curious. I noticed when you were trying to get to the piece of information there was also a piece about landowners. Can you just talk a little bit about the landowners, the pathway? I know previously we had some questions around that from folks in the community. So just how do you guys go about that process? Where are you at in that process? How does that all work?
Yeah, I would be happy to call up Amber Ditas, who is our land rights manager, to talk through that more specifically.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Amber Ditas, XL Energy, Manager of Siting and Land Rights. Jen and I manage the Siting and Land Rights team here in Colorado for all of our projects, all of our assets. My focus is acquisition and helping to lead the team that's responsible for working with the landowners on the entire pathway project. And also Mandy Ewing, who's on my team, she's leading this segment specifically. Before I kind of talk about how we approach acquisition, I wanted to share some statistics. So we started outreach with the impacted landowners about 2 months ago. It was in December, sort of beginning of the year, and let me back up. We've been doing outreach for a couple of years now, but this was meeting specifically with landowners who are on the preferred route. So in December of last year, we went public with our preferred route for segment 5. We sort of took the holidays and sort of the first part of the year to kind of get ready to start reaching out to landowners along the preferred route. Many of them we had contact with through the various open houses that we were performing in the area over the last couple of years. So we have in El Paso County, we've got about 48 landowners who we are crossing their property with the transmission line. Of that, of the 48 landowners, 50% have to date granted us right of entry. What that includes is they've given us permission to enter their property to perform things like land survey, biological surveys, geotechnical studies in some cases. So we see that as sort of a sign that the landowners are engaging with us and that they're letting us come onto their property and start surveying for the project. Of the 48 landowners, which make up about 41 miles, 22% have actually signed an option agreement with us for the transmission line easement. We're approaching this a little different than like a typical acquisition where we'd go straight to a non-exclusive easement. This is set up where we put in place an option for that non-exclusive easement, which allows us to get on the property, to do the survey, to do all those studies, and then to work with the landowners to figure out, do you have any water lines on the property? Are you running any PVC out to watering areas? Or, do you have concerns about fencing? That the option period allows us to work with the landowner to do kind of micrositing on their property so that we can come up with the right location for the 150-foot non-exclusive easement, and then also get down into details of, do we need to sort of adjust the pole placement to account for existing features on the property, to ensure they can still do ag activities, things like that. So that's what the option period allows us to do. Once the permits are all in hand and we're getting ready to start construction, we would then exercise the option and put in place the final easement for the 150-foot right-of-way. So to date, like I said, 22% have signed the option agreement, 50% are allowing us to come on and do survey. We have been able to make contact with all of the landowners and had productive conversations with all but 4. We continue to reach out and see if they're willing to, take a meeting with us in person or, oops, I think we lost our slides, but I'm not sure there was anything up there of relevance. And just talk with us about their concerns, their questions. Do we need to get certain individuals out in the field to take a look at certain things on their property? So I think given we've just started 2 months ago, I think this is actually more significant progress has occurred in El Paso County on the negotiation front compared to all of the other segments so far. We have completed acquisition of the right-of-way on segments 2 and 3, which makes up about 200 miles. All of those negotiations ended successfully, and we did not have to proceed to a hearing for condemnation. Do you want me to talk a little bit more about that hot topic?
Please.
Okay. So Piesco does hold the, we do possess the right to acquire land rights through the statutory process for our electric transmission and substation facilities. It's a right granted under Title 38. Similar to, the same rights that cities and counties and other utilities possess to build infrastructure that's deemed in the public need, as evidenced by our Certificate of Public Convenience and Necessity. The way that Public Service, Xcel Energy, we're one and the same, the way that we approach condemnation is not something that we take lightly. We view it as a tool in the toolbox and a tool that is always the tool that is the last option in the toolbox. We find that getting out into the communities early, engaging with the landowners, understanding their unique concerns, almost always sort of results in a mutual agreement for the land right that we're seeking. And we're also seeking a land right that is non-exclusive. This is not us trying to prevent the landowners from continuing to use their property. It's a land right that just allows us to build, own, and operate that line safely. Some statistics on sort of how often we use the tool in our toolbox that is eminent domain. We will, and generally, we will start the condemnation process on about 2% of our negotiations, and this is a statistic that's sort of statewide. Of those 2% where we actually start the process, less than half of those actually result in us going to a hearing. And that's a hearing for immediate possession and condemnation. They happen at the same time. Like I just said, we have been able to avoid hearings altogether on segments 2 and 3. I think, that's because we have a large team of seasoned right-of-way agents that, report up through Mandy and me. We're working daily on addressing landowner concerns, seeing if there's ways we can, address their concerns in the easement itself or come out and look at things on their property. So I think it's a tool that we have. It's not one that, like I said, we use often. I know that this is kind of bizarre to say this, but in some cases, we have been asked by a landowner to actually start the eminent domain process because there was maybe a cloud on title or something that was preventing the landowner from being able to enter into an agreement, in which case that tool then becomes a positive. And that's very rare, but I think it's always something that's viewed in a negative light. We have encountered it where we've seen some properties that have, sort of lack of a better term, a defunct conservation easement or something like that, where the grantee is gone. Nobody knows where they're at. And now this landowner has a terrible cloud on their title. An entity like us coming in wanting to put a facility on their property would allow them to, we would help sort of remove that for the area that we need for the transmission line. So it's not always a bad thing. Any questions on that? I know it's sort of the elephant in the room topic.
Any further questions?
Okay. Do you guys have any further questions for the Pathway team in general?
No further questions
I didn't.
about the project.
Just one quick one, one last quick one.
Mhm.
So again, appreciate doing what you can to accommodate Schriever and the Air Force Academy. I think that's good. What I don't know is kind of the process, and you might be there already. Do you actually, in your negotiations with them and trying to accommodate them, do you actually get something in writing from them saying, we can accept, the plan that you have because it doesn't interfere with our training areas or whatever? Do you get
Sure.
something in writing from them, and have they agreed to do that, or is that already done, or is that something still to get done, or?
We certainly have a lot of emails.
Okay,
I'll let Jen take that one because I think there's also a component as it relates to the land use permit as well, potentially.
So we typically would not acquire a letter stating anything. The way that we left that with the Air Force Academy and Schriever were many, many, many miles away from, that location, so that we're well outside of any area of interest for them. So just thinking specifically about the Air Force Academy training areas, the last conversation we had with them was, here's what we're proposing, the route that we're thinking might shake out to be preferred in this area. And there were at the time no concerns about that route. If it was asked if we were planning to bring the route back into those training areas, that we would reach out and have a discussion with them then. It was pretty challenging to get everyone in a room to have the conversations. I'm not sure that they would be willing to respond in writing to us at our request. If the county would like to request that of them as part of the general process or as part of the land use permit, we could do that, but it would be on the county.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Megan Harrington, Planning Director. That's part of our 1041 process. We've already had several conversations with the Air Force Academy as well as Schriever, all of the bases actually. And we know that there's a training area out there. When they submit for the 1041, we will be sure to get something from the Academy in writing.
Thank you. Any further questions? Okay. Any more general project questions for the team? Okay. This is a work session, and typically we do what we just did. We get a presentation. It's an informational item, and we have the opportunity to ask any questions and kind of put our sentiments on record. I believe that's been done today. However, because we are here and out in the most closely affected area of our county, we would like to provide the opportunity for any public that might be here to comment. That being said, this is really an opportunity for the team that you've heard from today to be able to kind of capture some concerns and follow up with those thereafter. And currently, just with the realization that there's not an application at the moment for the commissioners to consider and comment on, but we are here in the district and wanted to provide the forum. So if at this time there is if there are any members of the public who would like to comment on this item, please do so. You can have 3 minutes. And again, I don't think we're not expecting kind of a back and forth today, but it does give the project team an opportunity to understand concerns and then for you to be able to voice those concerns within their process currently. Are there any members of the public? There is one online. Okay. Are there any in the room here? Okay. Let's hear from that person online. You please introduce yourself and you will have 3 minutes.
This is Deb.
Yes, please introduce
Hello?
yourself and you'll have 3 minutes. We can hear you.
Hello?
Hello. Yes, please introduce yourself and you can have 3 minutes.
hear from that person online. You please introduce yourself and you will have 3.
Hello? Hello, can you hear me on the phone? Hello? Hello?
Sure. Or if there's a way that we can offer to capture any contact information, we can do it that way as well. Okay, we'll be in recess for just a second.
Test. Testing 1 2 1 2 test 1 2 1 2.
Hello?
Hello? Ms. Fletcher, can you hear me?
Yes,
Hello.
I can hear you now.
Okay. You are the next person to speak, and anytime you would like to speak, go right ahead. You have 3 minutes.
Okay, great, thank you. My name is Deb Fletcher, and I live on a farm between Rush and Boone, Colorado. And I just wanted to voice my opinion that I'm completely against the Xcel Energy Colorado pathway. But if the commissioners do decide to vote in its favor in the years to come, I would like to see that they do add a utility tax and a franchise fee tax to this project. I've been researching a little bit in different counties, and I came across a county that has a code of ordinance that reads, use of utility tax and franchise fees revenues And it says, the revenues which the county receives from the collection of the utility tax and franchise fee in the unincorporated area of the county shall not be bonded, pledged, or used as collateral for debt issued by the county other than in conjunction with the projects and activities which are exclusively for the use of the residents of the unincorporated area of the county. And I would greatly appreciate if our commissioners could, if this project goes through, add this franchise fee to this project and have it benefit the residents out here that are going to be affected for the benefit of the Denver residents who will be using the electricity. And I would love it to help our dirt roads and our volunteer fire department to get them paid and equipment that they need and everything else left over to go to our schools. And I know I've talked to some of the department heads in the El Paso County, and they said Tabor might be an effect of this if funds come in and must be refunded. So I'm requesting now, if that does happen in the future, that any funds refunded for property tax, I think is how they refund this, that it goes just to the residents out here that are affected by this Colorado pathway. I don't want the entire county of El Paso County benefiting from everybody else that's having to deal with this pathway and what's coming down the pike in the next few years. So that's all I have to say, just that I hope it doesn't happen, but unfortunately with progress and growth, I'm sure it's going to in the next few years. And I just love to see the citizens of Denver that benefit from this having to pay a tax, the franchise fees and the utility tax, to those of us out here having to deal with the structure that they get to benefit from. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Hello. Hello?
Ms. Reinbold?
Yes.
Hi, you are a part of the Board of County Commissioner meeting right now. You are the next person to speak on the Excel, and you will have 3 minutes. Please state your name, and you can go anytime.
Okay. My name is Paula Reinbold. Around the end of 2021, a group of us became a group in opposition initially to Excel. The the Community Action Coalition of Colorado. Anyway, we've had a lot of communications with Excel, and I want to appreciate their responsiveness. That's the positive side. There are a couple things. One is the biological survey was mentioned, and things. One is this is probably a good time to do a biological survey in that we just had rain enough to fill up what are, I guess, technically known as vernal pools. We call them stock ponds. They get water from the thunderstorms. Anyway, those filled up recently for much of this area just a couple of days ago. And so shortly, those will have the tadpoles from the toads and a number of other animals, dragonflies and things. Some of those things are on the state watch list, I think. There are certain amphibians and reptiles and other animals. Burrowing owls is another one that comes to mind, but those aren't so related to the water. Anyway, that was one thing. And another is the noise from the lines was discussed. And I asked Excel after one of the meetings, how far before the noise would attenuate to zero? And after asking a couple times, the answer finally came back that their calculations don't go out that far. So I don't know, but apparently it's farther than whatever Excel uses in their calculations. So for all practical purposes, there's no attenuation to zero. I know that can't be true, but apparently it's very large. And out here, you talk about the background noise. We have no background noise. Much of the time, it's absolutely silent. The loudest thing that we normally have is birdsong. I'm sitting here listening now to a mockingbird. We have several kinds of birds that we enjoy listening to. So, two things that people who live in the city don't seem to comprehend, and that I would hope that people could get an appreciation for, is that those of us who live in these more remote areas, we don't have background noise. So when you talk about something attenuating to background noise, it's not true for us the way it would be in the city. There's wind once in a while, but we have silence a lot more than we have wind. The other thing is our landscape. We don't have things affecting our views. If you run a line down Academy Boulevard or across Woodman or down I-25, it's barely noticed because there's so much there already. But there's nothing out here. About the
Ma'am?
highest you have is yeah.
Thank you very much. I would ask that you wrap up your comments at this point. We've gone well past the 3 minutes, but thank you very
sorry.
much. Can you wrap them up?
That's basically it.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Okay. Hearing and seeing none other. Thank you very much for your time. Keep us apprised on the project, and I know you'll be working closely with our planning team once there's an application in, and that will the process is defined on our interaction, as you will know from that point on. Thank you. Adjourned.
Okay. Yeah, I know. Literally, I did that last time.